Welcome to the World Class Speaking podcast series. This is a place where you will learn how to present, persuade, and profit by improving your communication skills. Each episode in the series is a chapter from the book World Class Speaking in Action. And each chapter is written by a certified world class speaking coach. I'm your host, Matt Miller, and I've carefully crafted and summarized each chapter in the book. Have you sat through an entire speech or presentation and you can't remember a single thing other than maybe the main topic of the presentation? What would be the point if you can't remember anything that was said? In this episode, we're going to discuss the best way to get your audience to remember your main points using anchors. This is episode 16, how to create anchors that captivate, motivate, and activate your audience. And the author of this chapter is Dr. Richard C. Harris. And Dr. Richard C. Harris is a certified world-class speaking coach, an award-winning author, a speech professional, and a keynote speaker. And I'm going to share why this episode is important. Because it's frustrating for both the speaker and the audience if they can't remember anything about the presentation. This oftentimes happens even just 5 to 10 minutes after it concludes. Because of this, the best speakers from all across the world use anchors to help make their points memorable. A speech anchor is anything that will help your audience remember the main points to your presentation or your speech. And there's 4 main anchors, and number 1 is an anecdote or a story. A story can be utilized to drive home a main point because people remember stories. Facts tell, but stories sell. Utilize stories to drive home a main point. Another acronym is POUR, pour. Stories must pour out your experiences, successes, events, and failures. And pour stands for personal, original, useful, and relevant. Whenever you're crafting a story, use this acronym to make sure that it's personal to you, it's original, you're not copying off anybody, it's useful, it's tactical, it provides value, and it's also relevant to the main message of the speech. And the second anchor is an analogy or a comparison. And I was listening to this podcast, and the speaker at the stage looked out to the audience and said, "I need a volunteer." He looked across the audience, he picked out a boy that was in the front, and the boy came up to the front stage. And it was the speaker and the boy. And he reached into his pocket, pulled out a piece of paper, crumbled it up in the form of a ball, and he placed the ball of paper on the ground. And then he told the boy to back up 10 feet from where he was at. And then the speaker took a step back and he said, "We're playing soccer. I'm shooting the ball. You're the goalie. You need to stop the piece of paper from getting past you." The speaker takes a few steps back. He runs up to the piece of paper, kicks it, and it ends up going past the goalie for a goal. However, the point that the piece of paper got past the person that was selected to go on front of the audience didn't matter. What mattered was the analogy that went with the shooting of the piece of paper. The speaker said, "I just shot a soccer ball at the goalie." In life, when we are going to achieve a goal or take on a challenge, there's ultimately, inevitably, going to be obstacles in our way. So when we go to attack that goal, we need to shoot, we need to start, we need to attempt. And then there's going to be obstacles in our way. Whether or not we achieve and we score doesn't matter. But the fact that we tried and we give it our best effort is what matters in the end. And the speaker ends up comparing the soccer ball and shooting that through the goalie to our goals being stopped by challenges and circumstances. And that was a powerful visualization of pulling somebody up on the stage and talking about goals and dreams. Another example of an analogy is squeezing an orange. If you think about it, when you apply external force and pressure to an orange and you squeeze it, what comes out is whatever is inside the orange. When you squeeze an orange, you can actually squeeze out orange juice. But whatever comes out of the orange is what's ever inside. Now, if you apply external force and pressure to a human being, whatever comes out is the content of the inside of that person. If there's somebody that's always positive and they have a strong mindset and they've been training, then when you apply pressure and force to them, typically they're going to be positive and they're going to get through the situation. But if you apply that same pressure and force to somebody that doesn't train their mind, doesn't train their body, always has a victim mindset, always is making excuses, always is negative, then whatever comes out of that person typically is going to be negative, victim, complaining, and that sort of stuff. The point of that analogy is if you build up the inside of you, you strengthen your mind and you strengthen your body, then when external forces are applied to you, you're going to be better off. And that's another example of an analogy. Thirdly, there's an acronym. And an acronym is simply an abbreviation, and it can be thought of as a word that has a series of letters, and each of those letters stands for something specifically. It adds structure to a speech. An example using alliteration, which is the same sound over and over again, paired with an acronym, would be the 3 C's to change. CCC, challenge the information, change your involvement, and choose your intentions. Another example of an acronym would be the key to happiness is being tall. TALL, thinking, acting, laughing, and learning. You can use acronyms as an anchor to support your main points. And then lastly, there are activities, which is an anchor that can support your main point. And you need to earn the right to engage your audience in an activity. Typically, you don't want to start off with an activity just because if you do that, you haven't built up rapport with your audience. So you want to ease them into the activity by first providing some valuable insights. An activity can be anything from asking your audience to close their eyes and imagine a scene as you describe it, to asking them to turn to their neighbor and have a discussion. Or maybe you break them into small groups and then you have them come back and talk about something that they learned. And I recently joined National Speakers Association for Ohio. And during one of the get-togethers, there was a keynote speaker. And all of us gathered together and watched the keynote speaker. And the main message of the keynote speaker was revolving around personal branding and how it's so important for you to develop a personal brand, to put yourself out there and let people know what your reputation is. And I don't remember a whole lot from that speech, but the one thing that I do remember is the activity that she gave. And she said, I want everybody to take a minute, close your eyes, and think about 5 words that describe you. And we took a minute, and then she said, write down those 5 words. We wrote down those 5 words in one column. And then she said, in the next column over, I want you to do that same exercise, but think about how your best friend would describe you in 5 words. So we thought about it and wrote down those 5 words. And then she said, now I want 5 words described from your audience and your fans. And how would they describe you? Then you'd write down those 5 words. And then at the very end, she said, I want you to count up all words that are the same in each of the 3 columns. So you'd go into each 3 columns and you see if you had any consistent words in each of the columns. And then she said, by a raise of hands, how many people had 5 words, all 5 that were the same in all 3 columns? Nobody raised their hand. And then she said, what about 4 words that were the same in all 3 columns? Very few people raised their hand. And then she said, how about 3? Some people raised their hand. How about 2? The majority raised their hand. What about 1? A lot of people raised their hand. And then some people also raised their hand for 0. Now, the goal would be to have all the same words in all 3 columns. Why? Because the first column is the words that we would describe ourselves as. This is the best version of ourselves from our perspective. We would write down 5 amazing words. Then in the next column over, how would our best friend describe us as? Well, that's probably how we actually are perceived as, because our best friend knows us and is going to give us that information whether we like it or not. And then the third column is how our audience perceives us as by just the content that we put out there and how we are ultimately being viewed from their perspective. Now, if we can align all three of these sections and have 3, 4, 5 similarities, then we are well on our way to being the same person off the stage as well as on the stage. And that's the importance. You want to have that congruence and alignment. And this will help us really be our true, authentic version of us. Now, I don't remember a whole lot from that presentation on personal branding, but the one thing that stood out is that activity that we all did together. And that's the importance of activities because that's something that I probably won't ever forget. To give a recap, there are 4 different anchors that you can use to support your main points. Number 1 is a story or an anecdote. Number 2 is an analogy or a comparison. Number 3 is an acronym or an abbreviation. And number 4 is an activity or an action. Anchors are important for us to use to drive home the main points of our speech. Use one of those 4 options when you have an important point that you want your audience to receive. Now that you know the importance of using anchors to help your audience remember your main points, for your next presentation, decide on which anchor you'll use, and then I encourage you to make sure that every main point in your upcoming speech is anchored by either an anecdote, an analogy, an acronym, or an activity. And that wraps up this episode, and in the next one, you will unlock a powerful technique used to tune into your audience's understanding through the use of metaphors. That's all we've got for this episode on the World Class Speaking podcast series. Until next time, remember that becoming a great communicator is so important because it leads to greater impact, influence, and income. Thank you for listening and have a great day.